Welcome to episode 240 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's June 28, 1942. Buenos Aires, Estadio Monumental. River Plate against Platense. And today, a forward line walks onto the pitch together for the first time. Juan Carlos Muñoz, José Manuel Moreno, Adolfo Pedernera, Ángel Labruna, and Félix Loustau. 5 names, 5 attackers, 1 nickname. La Máquina. The machine. River win 1-0. That scoreline sounds ordinary. The meaning is not. Because this is the first time the famous 5 of La Máquina play together. And from that line, from that idea of football, we can trace a thread to Alfredo Di Stéfano, to Colombia's El Dorado, to Millonarios, to Santiago Bernabéu, to Real Madrid, and to the first great European Cup dynasty. Football history loves clean beginnings. This one isn't clean, but it is beautiful. But how did we get here? Start with Argentina. Football arrives through British schools, railways, clubs, ports, and workers. Buenos Aires becomes one of the great football cities of the world. Argentina and Uruguay built the Rio de la Plata game. Technical, quick, expressive, streetwise, and proud. By the 1920s and 30s, Argentina has Olympic medals, South American championships, and a World Cup final in 1930. Then, in 1931, professionalism arrives in Argentina. We talked about that in episode 199. That matters, because now the great Buenos Aires clubs can become more than local institutions. Boca, Racing, Independiente, San Lorenzo, and River Plate. River, in particular, becomes Los Millonarios, the millionaires. The club spends heavily, moves into the monumental new stadium in Núñez in 1938, and builds one of the great talent machines in football. The Argentine idea behind the best football is often called La Nuestra, ours. Not English long ball orthodoxy, not rigid mechanics, but a football of touch, pause, deception, timing, and intelligence. And River becomes one of its finest laboratories. The origin of La Máquina is usually traced to 1941. Adolfo Pedernera, who had been a left winger, is moved into the centre-forward position, but not as a conventional battering ram. He drops away from the centre-backs. He comes into midfield. He connects. He draws markers out. He opens spaces. A false 9 before the phrase becomes fashionable. Around him, rivers start to move differently. José Manuel Moreno, El Charro, is not just an inside forward. He works, creates, covers, attacks and dominates rhythm. Ángel Labruna becomes a great scorer. Juan Carlos Muñoz gives width and trust on the right. And Félix Loustau, when he enters the picture, gives left-sided speed, flair and crossing. The system, still on paper, is an old formation. But paper lies. The players rotate, they change lanes, they make room for each other. The ball moves faster than the opponent's understanding. And on June 12, 1942, River beat Chacarita Juniors 6-2. The Uruguayan journalist Borocotó, writing in El Gráfico, gives the name La Máquina, the machine. But here is the wonderful twist. The name appears before the most famous 5-man line has actually played together, because that happens today, June 28, Platense at the Monumental. Félix Loustau replaces Aristóbulo D'Ambrosi on the left wing, and the immortal line appears. Muñoz, Moreno, Pedernera, Labruna and Loustau. River win 1-0. Not 6-2, not a massacre, but 1-0. Because myths are not always born with fireworks. Sometimes they're born quietly, and history adds the thunder later. What made them different? Movement. Above all, movement. Pedernera retreats and conducts. Moreno runs the right side like a second brain. Labruna arrives in scoring zones, and Muñoz and Loustau stretch the field. Behind them, players such as Bruno Rodolfi and José Ramos do the sacrificial work. Ricardo Vaggi anchors the defense. Norberto Iacono and Luis Ferreira are part of the structure. Later, other names rotate through. This is not 5 magicians ignoring the rest. It is an entire team creating the conditions for the front 5 to look inevitable. And opponents felt it. Ernesto Lasazzi of Boca later gave one of the great rival compliments. He said he played against La Máquina wanting to beat them, but as a football fan, he would rather sit in the stands and watch them play. River win the Argentine League in 1941 and 42. then again in 45 and 47. They win Copa Aldao titles against the Uruguayan champions. They are Argentina's great team of the decade. But we should be careful. The myth is enormous. The reality is stranger. The famous five, Muñoz, Moreno, Pedernera, Labruna and Loustau, only played together in 18 league matches. 18. That is almost impossible to believe given how often they are discussed as a unit. But why so few? Because lineups change, injuries happen, other forwards are used. Moreno leaves for Mexico for part of the decade. Pedernera eventually leaves. De Ambrosi and Alberto Gallo also appear. The real river of the 1940s is broader than the postcard. But the postcard survives because it captures an idea. Not a season-by-season spreadsheet, but an idea. Football as motion. Football as intelligence. Football as collective improvisation. That is why La Máquina is so often linked, sometimes too neatly, to later revolutions. Hungary in the 1950s, the Dutch in the 1970s, total football, positional rotation, the false nine. Were they literally playing Ajax 1972 football 30 years early? No. But they did show that attacking players could rotate, confuse markers, and create superiority by movement rather than fixed position. Yes, they did. And that is the point. But so what? La Máquina becomes Argentina's great lost international argument. This team's prime happens while Europe is at war. There is no Club World Cup, no European Cup, no Intercontinental Cup, no real mechanism to place River against the best of Europe. So River's greatness becomes partly local, partly continental, partly remembered, partly imagined. And that is how myths work. La Máquina gives rise to Alfredo Di Stéfano, not as one of the original famous five, and that distinction matters. Di Stéfano is younger. He comes through River's world. He watches, learns, absorbs. He spends time at Huracán, returns to River, and in 1947 becomes the new force after Pedernera's era. If Pedernera is the brain of La Máquina, Di Stéfano becomes the explosion that follows it. A player who doesn't merely occupy a position. He expands the match. Then comes the strike. The Argentine player strike of 1948 helps fracture the old system. Players want rights, pay, freedom and recognition. In Colombia, Di Mayor and the Federation split, and the Colombian League enters its semi-outlaw golden age, El Dorado. It's a wild story. I told it in episode 184. Highly recommend listening to it. Adolfo Pedernera goes to Millonarios in Borocotó, and then he helps bring Néstor Rossi and Alfredo Di Stéfano. The intelligence of River is transplanted to Colombia. Millonarios become the Ballet Azul, the Blue Ballet. In 1952, Real Madrid organized a Golden Jubilee tournament. The South American invite had been expected to be River Plate, but instead, Millonarios come, and Di Stéfano comes with them. Real Madrid lose 4-2. Di Stéfano scores twice. Santiago Bernabéu sees the player who will change the future of his club. That is the wild chain. La Máquina creates a football civilization. Di Stéfano grows inside it. The strike sends that talent into Colombia. Millonarios replace River in Madrid's anniversary tournament. Di Stéfano destroys Real Madrid in their own celebration. And Bernabéu decides he must have him. And with Di Stéfano, Real Madrid win 5 straight European Cups from 1956 to 60. We shouldn't say that La Máquina caused Real Madrid's dynasty. History isn't that simple. But we can say this. Without La Máquina, there is no Di Stéfano in the same way. Without Di Stéfano, there is no Real Madrid dynasty in the same way. And without that dynasty, European club football doesn't develop its mythology in quite the same way. La Máquina reminds us that football memory is built from fragments. 18 league matches. That is all the famous five played together. Yet here we are, more than 80 years later, still naming them. Muñoz, Moreno, Pedernera, Labruna and Loustau. Because sometimes a team doesn't need hundreds of matches to become eternal. It needs the right players at the right club, in the right culture, playing football that people didn't have words for yet. Then someone finds the words. La Máquina, the machine. Before we go, 3 things to take away from June 28, 1942. First, today is not the birth of River's greatness, and not even the first use of the nickname, but it is the first time the immortal 5-man line appears together, Muñoz, Moreno, Pedernera, Labruna and Loustau. Second, the myth is larger than the minutes. The famous 5 played together only 18 league matches, but they came to represent an entire way of imagining Argentine attacking football. Third, La Máquina's shadow runs astonishingly far, from Pedernera to Stéfano, from River to Millonarios, from El Dorado to Bernabéu, from Madrid's anniversary defeat to the European Cup dynasty. On this day in 1942, River Plate beat Platense 1-0 at the Monumental. The famous La Máquina forward line played together for the first time, and one of football's most powerful myths began to move. That is all for episode 240 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. If you like this story, you can help me push the show in front of more people by rating it 5 stars and sharing it with your friends. You'll be surprised how much it helps the algorithm. And if you have an idea for the show, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. Tomorrow, we go to June 29, 1958, to Solna in Stockholm, Brazil against Sweden, a 17-year-old Pele, a 5-2 World Cup final, and the day Brazil finally became Brazil. See you then.